As some of you know, the Dark Neostorm Special Edition goes out today, and that's pretty exciting because with it comes 4 promo cards, 3 of which are new to the TCG. The first reprint is going to be Shooting Riser Dragon. This card was previously released in a Jump promo, and that's kind of cool, but the problem is this card wasn't really available to European players or anyone outside of North America, so this is now a widely available version of this pretty cool Synchro monster. But beyond that, we have 3 new cards. There is MAGICALIZED Fusion, which is basically a Miracle Fusion for Spellcaster monsters, Fury of Fire, which is an interesting Salamangreat double Monster Reborn card that can kind of be used as a last resort special summon. Then also you have the card I want to talk about, Beat Raptor, and Beat Raptor is really interesting. This card isn't technically only anti-link monster, it does stop any sort of extra deck monster, but it mostly is good against decks that are only playing links because it locks out the extra monster zone while it's on the field. In today's video, I want to discuss the applications of this card against the current meta and then also in a more generic sense, as well as talk about some of the different decks that might want to play this card in the coming weeks. As always, if you would like to purchase any of these 4 promo cards or the special edition itself, make sure to go to tcgplayer.com using my link in the description below. That not only gets you guys those cards at the best prices, but also helps out the channel a little bit, which is awesome for everyone involved. Beat Raptor is a level 4 Earth Dinosaur monster with 1400 attack and 2000 defense. This card's effect says negate the effects of monsters in the extra monster zones while this card is in the main monster zone. When this card is destroyed by battle, you can special summon 1 Beat Raptor from your deck. You can only use this effect of Beat Raptor once per turn. The first effect of this card is really interesting because it locks both players out of monster effects from the extra monster zone. Now, of course, when you're playing this card, you probably don't want to have anything in the extra monster zone so that it doesn't affect you. But what makes this card cool is that it doesn't just negate link monsters, even though most of the time that's what it'll be used against. You can also negate like fusions or synchros or exceeds or even pendulum monsters that are in the extra monster zone. That makes it very effective against pretty much every matchup out there. There's not really a deck out there besides other stun strategies that aren't going to be summoning at least 1 monster to the extra monster zone, which means this thing is always just going to be a temporary negation for a lot of your opponent's best monsters. But what really separates this card from other cards like Inspector Border or the Barrier Statues is that this thing floats into another copy of itself if it's destroyed by battle. I know what you're thinking. You might be saying, well, what if your opponent just summons a monster that can kill this thing by a card effect? Well, the good news is that in most cases, those cards that your opponent would be using to get rid of this thing with a card effect are usually going to be summoned to that extra monster zone. In that case, your opponent actually can't use those effects on this thing because it stops those effects while it's on the field. So to deal with this card, your opponent is going to have to summon 2 monsters, one with more than 1400 attack points and one with more than 2000 attack points, and without using extra deck effects, that definitely puts your opponent at a huge disadvantage. Even if they do manage to deal with this card and actually get it off the board and run through both copies of it, a lot of the times they've now missed out on multiple effects that they wanted to use in that extra monster zone. For example, if you summon this thing against Salamangreats, they probably will be able to get rid of this thing with like a Mirage Stelio down the line, but in doing so, they're missing out on their Bailing Search because that'll be summoned in the extra monster zone. Against a deck like Orcus, this thing is exceptional as well, just because you can actually lock your opponent out of a lot of their effects. They can't use any of their Nightmares because most of those are going to be summoned to the extra monster zone in the process, and that means that your opponent can't do their normal combo before they deal with not only 1 copy of this thing, but 2 copies because it floats into the other one. There aren't a lot of ways in an Orcus deck to actually deal with this thing without running it over in battle twice, and that means your opponent is going to miss out on a lot of effects. And while this card isn't great against Sky Strikers, it's still pretty good. They'll have to play a little bit more awkward than they want to because it means that they have to engage for the Afterburners, otherwise they're going to miss out on effects like Kagari and Shizuku and Hayate. It doesn't mean that it's just the end-all be-all of that matchup because they can disengage for the Afterburners, but a lot of the times they want to use the first engage for Ray or multi-roll, not the Afterburners, which means if you can summon this, it puts them in a very awkward position where maybe they don't get as much value out of their first turn as they would have if you didn't have this card on the field. Admittedly, this card isn't too great against Danger Thunders. They have tons of big monsters that they can special summon that don't special summon themselves from the extra deck. Things like KS Levineer can deal with this thing. A lot of the danger monsters can just attack over this thing. This isn't the greatest card against that deck, but if their hand isn't that great and you summon this thing turn 1 with a few back row, it could effectively lock them out of the game, especially if they really need that Skull Dread draw to fix their hand, this thing prevents them from doing that without them already having other combo pieces to deal with it before they summon the Skull Dread. And I think it's fine for this card not to just instantly win every matchup that you summon it against. I think of things like Mystic Mine that are super degenerate and everyone's complaining about them. This thing's a little bit more balanced. It doesn't necessarily win you the matchup when you summon it, and that's probably for the best, but it does put an annoying monster on your board for your opponent to deal with, especially when you have it backed up with other disruption effects like good trap cards. So what types of deck can this card actually be played in that's generic? Well, you can play this card in pretty much any slower strategy, especially the ones that are playing trap cards like stun decks, but this card is actually sometimes better than Inspector Border, especially in the decks where you actually want to use your main monster zone monster effects like an Altergeist. There's a lot of times with decks like Altergeist where you want to summon the border, but it locks you out of your effects, and while you might not care about your Hexia effect when you're locking your opponent out of the game, you do want to use your other effects, and that's where this card really comes in handy. However, this card has one very unique benefit over Inspector Border if you play it in a pretty specific deck, and that's that this thing is amazing. I mean, truly it's really awesome in any dedicated dinosaur strategy. We've seen True King dinos, we've seen pure dinosaurs with Lost World, we've seen tons of dinosaur variants be successful over the past couple months, and I feel like this is just another card to add to an already good rogue deck to maybe push it over the top and give it a really cool tech option against the meta decks of the format. What makes this card so cool in an actual dinosaur deck is that you suddenly have a lot more ways to get to this card and also support it with other disruption effects. You can search this thing with Soul Eating Oviraptor or Fossil Dig, but more importantly, you can special summon this from your deck with Baby Sarosaurus. While you're doing that, if you were activating the Baby Sarosaurus, that means you probably have some sort of combo going, so a lot of the times that you're summoning this card in a dedicated dinosaur deck, you also have an Ultimate Conductor Tyranno or an Overtex or something along the lines of a new form of disruption that maybe doesn't use the extra monster zone. I actually think dinosaurs are pretty well positioned right now. They have 3 miscellaneous source after all, and they have Dragonic Diagram and all these other combo cards, and this could be a pretty cool way to lock your opponent out while already having a decent board with your regular dinosaur cards that you already would have been playing. The hard part might be figuring out how many copies of this card to play in a dinosaur deck. Sure, all you really need is that one copy, but I actually think adding the second copy really does give that extra form of resilience where your opponent has to remove it twice, not just once. I think going towards the full 3 copies might be a bit much, especially if this is only a side deck card, but it definitely is something to consider if you're playing against dinosaurs, that they very likely will have this card either in their main or side deck. This card isn't impossible to deal with by itself, but when it's backed up by something like Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, it definitely is very annoying to get off the field effectively. To me, there are 2 things that really make this card worth looking at compared to other options. The first thing is that floating effect, which I think is so strong for a card like this. We really don't see those types of effects on other stun cards like Inspector Border or those barrier statues. So I think if you want to use this card, you really do want to play more than 1 copy, maybe not 3 copies, but at least 2 copies, because the reason this card is so strong is that your opponent has to deal with 2 copies in the same turn if they want to get it off the field. I think that really does set this card apart from those other cards out there. More importantly though, I think what some people might see as a weakness in this card actually ends up being a benefit depending on the deck that you play it in. The biggest weakness of this card is that it doesn't just instantly win you the game when you normal summon it, and I think that's fine. I think it's fine for a couple reasons. From a design standpoint, I think it's okay that not every single card just wins you the game when it's summoned. I think of things like Mystic Mine or Inspector Border, those cards probably shouldn't exist. Maybe they're a little bit too powerful, but what makes this card cool from a gameplay standpoint is that you don't necessarily have to be playing a stun deck to take advantage of this card. In fact, all you really have to be doing is playing a deck that doesn't really care about the extra monster zone. Maybe you summon a link monster up there that gets value, and then later on in the turn you summon better link monsters in the main monster zone, so you don't really care about that extra monster zone. I think what makes this card so much cooler than something like Inspector Border is that you can play it in a variety of decks. For example, you'd probably never play Inspector Border in a dinosaur deck. You'd be seen as absolutely crazy just because a lot of the dinosaur cards have activated effects that you want to use, but you can play this card in a dinosaur deck because even though this thing does shut off the extra monster zone from activating their effects, it doesn't prevent all monsters from activating their effects, which means that you can actually use it in decks that have good monster effects that don't activate any extra monster zone. This sometimes does come up in Altergeist when you have the Inspector Border, but you also have cards like Marionetter and Miluseek and Multifaker. This card might be a little bit better in some cases in Altergeist just because it doesn't lock you out of your good effects from the main monster zone, but will lock your opponent out of a lot of their good effects, like the Balinks, like the Heatleos, like the Skystriker cards, like all the Nightmare cards that can be so annoying to play against. I don't know if Beat Raptor is going to be the next big thing. I don't know if it's going to be the next Inspector Border, but I do think it's a cool import to give to the TCG right before the NAWCQ, if only because it's worth talking about. It's not just a filler card. It actually has some uses against the top strategies, and it might make you think a little bit more when you're playing against a deck that has any dinosaur monsters. Could they be playing this card? Should I save an out for it? That sort of lines of thinking that I think makes this card actually pretty interesting heading into the next couple weeks here. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Like I said, if you'd like to purchase this card or any of the other cards I talked about, make sure to use my link to tcgplayer.com to not only get you guys the cards you need, but also help support the channel. I'll see you later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.